Who are you?
I am Jane Frances Dunlop.
Why were you on a safari?
Why was I on a safari?
Why were you on a safari?
I was on a safari because we had traveled to South Africa and it seemed like the thing to do. I think it was an opportunity. We were close enough to the Kruger National Park that we could visit it, and so it felt like an exciting thing to do.
Had you ever been on a safari before?
No safaris before.
Is it something you'd wanted to do or considered doing for a while, or was it more impromptu and just more access-based?
I think it was more access-based. I think I've never have been opposed to the idea of doing a safari, but I don't think I ever kind of was like, really, one of the things I want to do most in the world was safari. I think it just, was very much an opportunity to be taken.
Right. And what was your experience of safarying? Is that the verb? Of going on a safari?
I think so. I think that's the verb. What was my experience? Safari, or at least the safari we were on, was mostly driving through very beautiful landscapes. And it seems like potentially it could have been like a much more stressful experience if the people we were with were more obsessed or interested in seeing certain animals as opposed to just kind of letting the exploration of the space, the site, be what it was. I think that the experience of being on safari could be stressful if a person wanted to make sure they saw a bunch of lions or, a leopard. And we got to see a lion sleeping, and we got to see a leopard in a tree with a kill, and that was very cool. I think for me, at least, it was more interesting just to be like in the park, driving around, and a lot of the time was just kind of driving and looking without seeing anything, or just seeing kind of some giraffes in the distance, or just looking at the landscapes, and the landscapes themselves were really beautiful. And I think just driving around in a beautiful landscape is something I enjoy. I think I enjoy more than you.
Would you describe the park in itself as a type of space, like the national park, as sort of a geographic type different to others?
I don't know if we could say it's yes. Sort of geographic type, but is right. But yeah, of course, like a park, to be a park is a kind of space, whether it's the park at the end of our road or a national park. Those are all kind of variants on this idea of a particular kind of space that has particular purposes.
I mean, do you think what is sort of the shared idea of a park between the one at the end of the road and like a national park the size of a country? Like, how are they both a park?
I think parks are like kind of public leisure spaces. I mean, and I think maybe just leisure spaces. So obviously, not all parks are public parks. So a public park in the city is a public leisure space, but the national park is also a space for kind of exploring and being in, and not kind of space that is set aside for like non-productive purposes, or its productive purposes is tourism, is leisure, is kind of meandering, wandering.
Does the sort of the forced delineation of a park and sort of its need to have edges, does that complicate sort of the spatial experience of it, do you think? No, I think that's kind of part of like what
what defines it as a space, that it is a definable space, right? A park has edges.
So it's an open space within walls. So it's an open.
It's a bound space. Parks don't all have walls, but they have edges, and sometimes I think the boundaries of parks are more and less porous. I mean, my understanding of the Kruger is that it's a massive national park, but that there are kind of private reserves around it, so the space itself, like the edges are not so clear cut as this is where the park ends, and then suddenly it's a city, or suddenly it's spaces with many people in it. That kind of the nature reserve part of it exists in different ways in the park as a national park. Something kind of held. A national park is something that's maybe like held by held by the country versus like private reserves, private parks around it that might have a similar purpose or ethos, but are different insofar as how ownership or access might be defined.
What sort of, have you been to any national parks of a comparable size before in other places?
I don't know. I mean, while we were there, they kept on telling us the size of it, right? Which is massive. I don't remember it. Now 20,000 kilometers? 20,000 square kilometers? Something like that. Or maybe not, something more, something less. I don't remember. I have no idea. I don't know how big some of the national parks in Canada that we've been to are. I feel like maybe some of the stuff in the Rockies, like the Rockies, could be similarly massive. But that's also, I think, a series of parks beside each other, as opposed to like one space. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, what do you think is? Do you think there's much fundamentally different between sort of the Canadian national parks and the Kruger National Park?
The Kruger was struck or noticed while we were there that all of the tourists, ourselves included, like referred to Kruger, going to Kruger National Park, and the locals or South African people would always talked about it as the Kruger.
What do you think that could mean?
I think it's maybe just like kind of custom or ways in which names are rendered. I just think it's interesting because not obviously, the park is named after a South African politician, right? It is. So then to turn that into like the Kruger as opposed to I can't think of a comparable place that's named for someone in that way that you would refer to as like the something.
And is that like a sort of progressive thing, sort of try and take away? Because I'm guessing that was like a apartheid era or
before
the governments that made that happen kind of thing.
Yeah, before apartheid, but yes. Yeah, I don't know.
What are the sort of in your opinion, what are the sort of ethics of being a tourist in a space like that sort of has the I don't know, that there's sort of colonial history quite explicitly there in that people were like kicked off like ancestral land and stuff, right, in order to make the limits of that park. How does that complicate the leisure aspect of it, sort of as you like observation and leisure are very different.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we talked about while we were there, the entire experience of being in South Africa is fraught because that history is so recent and so obviously defines like kind of all social interactions or like kind of all the spaces you enter in such an intense way, but kind of in a way that also is very difficult to understand fully or navigate maybe properly or considerately as someone who is not from those spaces. And so I think, one has an awareness of that when traveling throughout that whole country. And I think the national park in particular, I think as we talked about, like I kind of started to read about the social history of the park, and it is, it's not straightforward, right? It's like any massive national project kind of becomes entangled not just in one particular historical moment, but rather like the kind of historical evolution of the space, and then various kind of interacting policies and politics, that unfold kind of across the late 19th, early 20th century when the land is kind of accumulated for that space. But then also, we had conversations with the guys who were taking us through the park and with other people when we were there, and there's also a real emphasis on there seems to be an effort right now, or a contemporary effort, to kind of create an ownership of those spaces for people who are indigenous to those areas. And I think that was really kind of very, very clear in terms of the interactions that the guides we had for the safari had with each other, that they were often speaking in other languages to communicate the movement of animals and also people and also things through the park.
On radios.
Yeah, they don't speak. And this is also, I'm not sure what languages they were speaking. What did we? There's 11.
Yeah, 11 official, including English and Afrikaans.
Yeah. So, but that, I don't know. Maybe that's kind of an over utopian reading of it, but there did feel like there was a sense in which we were visiting these spaces, but visiting these spaces kind of under the guidance of people who these spaces belong to, or have a real sense of kind of affinity and ownership of these spaces. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I know, I know what you mean by that. But yeah, I definitely saw that there was an awkwardness, really, just sort of being in that country, really.
Yeah.
It's just a very recent and a very, I don't know, it's almost sort of a late 20th century exaggeration, right? Colonialism is sort of taking a lot of what was unspoken, right, about sort of colonialism and making it very explicit, sort of the very sort of extreme legislative racialization and splitting people into different groups and categories, and I don't know. It's troubling, right? And its legacy persists.
And I guess that's kind of part of what was particularly actually interesting about being in the Kruger National Park, being in safari, was having spent a week in Johannesburg, being very aware, very conscious of the existence of a kind of cultural politic that was beyond my understanding and knowledge, and being very aware that that city is and continues to be shaped by those histories, and by kind of continued inequities, and then to kind of drive 5 hours out of the city and be in this empty space where one is just rolling around looking for groups of elephants to take pictures of, which was and it was to be being on safari was such an amazing experience. It was so interesting to see these animals in their natural, or in a habitat that they live in, which is also, I guess, their natural habitat, but maybe not their native habitat. So one of the things we were told when we were there was that the area around Cape Town, or the winelands, had been a place where all of the elephants had been, but had been
which is much greener, right?
Yeah, which is why the vineyards are there. Like, it's a good place to grow wine, so they pushed all the animals further north and further inland, and so even the presence of the animals within that space, it's not, I guess it's the kind of the way in which a national park, and I think a national park anywhere, like what it does, whether it's here or in Canada, here in England or in Canada or in South Africa, is like a kind of constructing of nature, right? It's saying like this is, and I think one can always, there are many things that can be said about nature as always a construct, always something that is framed and called nature in opposition to whatever civilization or to more constructed realities. But it is also, it's self-construction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you think do you think there is a sort of cynicism in the construction of national parks and tourist infrastructure? Sort of the idea of the unspoiled wilderness, sort of the unexploited.
I don't think there's a cynicism. I think that there's like a politics and ideology to it, right? That it's about showcasing some part of a country in a way that is always tied into the sense of a national identity, right? Like these beautiful landscapes are part of a narrative of nationhood, right, and of identity, and so those kind of spaces are important because they can be a tool that reinforces that, like what part of what Canada is the place where the Rockies are, right? Mm-hmm. Like part of what England is like walking through the rolling hills of the Peak District, like these kind of these spaces are also about maybe creating the backdrop on which particular aspects of the national identity get performed, or so those aspects can be performed somewhere. And I do think, and I also think aside from I think there is value to those spaces. I don't think it's cynical, and I also think that obviously, like in the increasing era of climate catastrophe and animal extinction, et cetera, like that these spaces do have a value. There's a value to protecting nature, even if that nature is something, a kind of constructed idea. But the only way to kind of maintain it is to acknowledge that constructed idea and kind of look after small pieces of it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there will be more national parks as the environment collapses and people try to protect the last few bits of it? Or
maybe? I don't know, unclear.
It's like effort put into protecting tiny portions instead of like working to protect the whole, right? Like,
but no, because I think, if we're thinking about ongoing climate catastrophe, like the point is that one cannot protect you can't protect one bit. You have to protect all of it, or you don't get to protect any of it. But
that's hard of the people who want to they don't want to destroy everything, they want to exploit everything, right? That's hard to sell.
Yeah, but national parks are our resources are exploitable just in other ways. Like their usefulness is in the fact that they are so-called natural spaces that then allow different kinds of extraction of tourist money, right? Extraction of particular national identity, kind of ideological backups, or what am I trying to say? Yeah, reinforce certain ideas or extract kind of resources in a different way.
Okay, tone shift. What animals did you see?
We saw hippos in the pond, and I saw that hippo kind of swimming along the river, which is very fun. It looked like a rock. I liked the fact that the hippos can't swim; they just kind of run and then let themselves glide through the water till they sink again. Like the idea, like imagining like hippos trudging along the bottom of a pond, because they can hold their breath for quite a while, right? Or long enough that they can get somewhere. So we saw hippos. We saw many impalas. Saw a tiny impala or a springback.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, it was very small. That was definitely, I think, one of the weirdest. That felt like I felt like some kind of mystical or imagined creature more than anything else I saw. Something out of, some kind of surreal animated film. So many giraffes. They were very beautiful and elegant. Saw many elephants. Saw a lion sleeping from far away. Saw a leopard in a tree eating an impala. Saw monkeys.
Yes, they were my favorite.
Yeah, they were your favorite. We saw hyenas, some little baby hyenas, very cheeky hyenas. And of course, we saw the rhinos, which were my favorite. And quite wild and amazing to see because they're so big and so strange.
Yeah, they don't. I don't know, they kind of look a bit like a cow. I suppose they're not.
No, they
like
don't. They don't
cow,
look like.
maybe.
They don't really look like anything except for rhinoceroses. They're very strange. I mean, right behind you is the etching kind of Kruger one. Like, they don't look like that either. But yes, I suppose they are kind of like armored cows, but really no. Their faces are so different. I think that they look prehistoric. Kind of like the bison did in the park recently.
Do you think part of that feeling is sort of imposed by an awareness of their lack of longevity?
Maybe. But also, I mean, I don't think that the elephants actually are really weird. This elephant trunks are such a strange thing if you think about it for any amount of time. But no, I think that the rhinoceroses are particularly weird. Zebras, we saw zebras too. They were very weird.
Yeah. And we saw a couple of crocodiles. Thank God, no snakes there.
Oh yeah. Just tiny crocodiles.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about related to safari?
The sunset? No. Oh, we saw sunset and the sunrises. The sunrises were pretty spectacular. I think that that's maybe, obviously the point of safari is to see the animals, but I think that so much of the safari time is spent not seeing animals and just like looking at not empty spaces. I'm sure there were tons of animals that were hidden that we couldn't see, but like looking at landscape and looking at the sky and the different ways in which the light kind of changes over the course of the day, or the way that the light looks different and when you are in a different hemisphere, and the way that the colors change when it is a different hemisphere and different plants, and just like slightly different greens and slightly different like golds and browns and all of those colors kind of always felt alien, right? It felt so different, but kind of uncanny, I think. I think I use the word uncanny quite often over there because it seems so familiar while also being or feeling so strange at the same time. that was something that was really striking. And I think because it's such a big space, especially that second day when we were just driving we were out for like 8 hours, 9 hours.
Mm-hmm.
We've covered so much distance. And obviously, like the landscape changes in different parts of the park. And that was also really interesting. Just going from this like flat and empty to like the rocks and the ponds and the rivers and all of those different landscapes.
Yeah, it's the size of the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's massive. I like this with those birds too, with the really iridescent blue feathers. It's been quite nice.
Would you safari again?
Yes, I think so. I really enjoy just driving around for hours and hours in a place where it's always beautiful to look. But I think, we also talked about that. I really like empty space for thinking of and being left to kind of contemplate the horizon and also whatever I want. So I think I could happily safari again. More swimming than next time, perhaps.
Well, that's not something you want to swim, is it? Not all the crocodiles there.
No, probably not. But I would, and a little swim. I'm sure there's places you could do a little swim. It would be fun to swim somewhere where you could see a hippo far away and know that the hippo would not get you. They are very dangerous also.
Would you prefer to be killed by accident or killed for food? Like if we're talking hippo crocodile.
I don't know.
Like I wouldn't want to swim in any of those ponds or rivers because neither of those sounds ideal.
No, I mean I don't really think would rather neither, to be honest.
Maybe stick to the municipal baths.
Fun. What was your favorite part of safari?
Monkeys. All the cheap little monkeys just bouncing around, having fun, jumping around the trees, being friends with each other.
The warthogs we saw wandering down the road were also very funny.
Yes. Yeah. The hyenas, I think, were the baby hyenas were super cute.
Yes. This was funny. Animals are funny. They're just living their little lives. The baby elephants, the baby rhinoceros.
Saw a rhino doing a big poo. That was
very funny.
Good stuff. Do you have like an interesting closing thought on safari as a concept, on natural resource exploitation of the unexploited? Or...
No. I mean, it's a very strange experience, and isn't one to think too hard on when you're doing it, right? The privilege to be on the other side of the the other side of the world, to be so far away from home, being driven around some massive national park, just looking at animals. It's a very strange and particular thing to get to do. So I very much enjoyed it, but very weird.